Hey, 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 everybody. Hey, great to see you today on 9/25/2022. Hey, we all made it through September 24th. Somehow or other, we all survived, right? So I hope everyone's doing well out there. We got an amazing show for you today. Oh my, today's show, I have a real good feeling about this one. And of course, what are we talking about today? Well, we are continuing our examination of Disco Dave, the Lord of Life, of his family, of his biological family, of his relatives. Particularly today, we're going to be diving deeper into this extremely interesting character named Susan Sugar. Now, this is so interesting to me, and I think all you guys out there who are watching are all in on this whole psychiatric bit. You know why? Because this is where the cutting edge research is being done. Folks, we've already debunked the cult theory, okay? Anybody who's still following this cult theory, still talking about the process coming into Untermeyer Park, Billy the Artist, Mr. Real Estate, you guys are like stuck in 1987, okay? And we have steamrolled that and we've moved on, right? And so we've already have shown how Maury Terry lied. And of course, we're continuing to talk about all that stuff as well. But it's these new found documents, these psychiatry letters that, in my opinion, well, they tell the whole story. Not only did we learn how Berkowitz did it and why Berkowitz did it, we also learned about his family, his friends, and we are continuing that today, talking about Susan Sugar and the Good Housekeeping article. So I just want to say hello to everybody out there in the chat. Moet, Patrick, we got my boy John Catalano, we got the Queen Ruby, we got Ray J, we got Diane G. Welcome. First time watching a live stream. We absolutely welcome. Mikey Morales, great to see you. Maureen, James, the gang is all here. Really great to see you. All positive people who all know what's up. We're free. We are liberated. And now we're talking about actual real things. So, my friends, listen. As you all know, I can't do this alone. In fact, I don't want to do this alone. As I've been liking to say recently, and as I've been feeling this whole time, this entire video series, it ain't about me. It's about we. So, would you please give a hand to the most dapper gentleman in the land? The one. The only. Eric Galati. How are you, Eric?
I'm great. Always on a high for Psychiatric Sunday. We just keep, and this is a fact. You seem to be well. You are well. We keep ascending with this show.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking about it right before we went on air, Eric, about how wonderful this new iteration of the video series is. It's great actually to be, well, I mean, this might come as a shock to some people, but the investigation in Yonkers is over. It's been over for months. There's really no one left to talk to. We've talked to the principals. I've spoken to Wheat Car many times, have tons of emails between me and her. We've spoke to the Nettos. We've spoke to the Dupays. We have spoke to basically everyone that matters, the cops in Yonkers. And as I've been saying the last couple of days, Yonkers is kicked. There's no real reason to be even dealing with Yonkers anymore. And really the cutting edge research is being done here with all this new stuff, with all this psychiatric stuff. So I, for one, am enjoying this new iteration of the video series so much more. And I really think the audience is coming along, Eric. Our viewership is exploding.
It is. And we have to thank people who have reopened new thresholds to cross for you, like Mr. Scott Cardinal and Mr. Eric Hunley.
Yeah, and we also got to give Law and Lumber Rob a big shout out too, because
Yes, I was going to mention him, Law and Lumber Rob.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I'm laughing. Imagine if tomorrow morning we wake up and somebody has uploaded something on Yonkers.
Yeah, right. And proving the cult theory, right?
Yeah.
So
this every Psychiatric Sunday has been excellent, but we ascended higher when we got to what you called interlude. Then I did that opened up for me normal, psychotic, and the family last week. And then Susan Sugar Wishingrad, Mrs. Susan Sugar, maiden name Susan Wishingrad, his cousin, married to his cousin Robert, suddenly becomes a major protagonist in this for us.
I personally think, and listen, at the end of all this research that we're doing into Susan, we may find absolutely nothing in
Mhm,
their relationship. We got to just put that out there. But right now,
mhm.
having done this preliminary research and just starting to open up this channel of research and starting to ask these questions, I personally find Susan Sugar to be actually the most interesting person in the investigation right now.
Yes,
Uh,
and she's erudite. This is a sharp, erudite woman. I'd love to know about her background, not suspiciously.
right. I'd
And
love to know a lot more about her.
yeah, and I just want to point out to people, the newcomers, we are not trying to investigate and discover conspiracy. We're looking at the mysterious. That which is mysterious exists. And there's more that's coming because we're going to get the other half of the psychiatric letters eventually, the Dr. David Abrahamson letters to Berkowitz.
Right, and of course, we shout out to May. I let May Brussel Project. I left her a comment today asking where she's been, and hopefully she'll respond. We miss her, and she's always been a positive presence
I
in
was
our.
worried, and I spoke to May Brussel, the real May Brussel, she's deceased daughter, Barbara.
Hmm.
She was very grateful. May Brussel Project is preparing a Port of Departure cast. That's a podcast. And it was supposed to be this evening. I got no details, and it's supposed to be mentioning the son of Sam. Now she's a serious researcher. She helped Tom. What's the guy O'Neill?
O'Neill, yeah,
Yeah, she's very serious on all of this, and she's a great gal. But I was very worried because when a family or a loved one changes habit, I get
right,
concerned. 2 weeks
right.
I don't hear from her, and she's not an administrator anymore. Well, she still is, but she didn't appear.
Yeah,
So
we haven't seen her in weeks, so hopefully, May Brussel, you're doing okay, and we'll keep you in our thoughts. So anyway, Eric, let's get right into it because I
well, yeah, this is
we
long.
we put together a very dense and possibly very long
Well, you
show
did
today.
this. You did this show. I did the last two. You did into this is your baby. And I've got to say, and I'm not paying compliments for nothing, how your mind, the way our minds activated and correlating everything. Let's
It's
go
been
forward.
wonderful. Yeah, definitely. Well, everybody, get yourselves ready. Strap yourselves in. Get yourself your beverage. I'm stealing from Scott now. Your beverage of choice or your drug of choice, whatever you want, although it's a little early on Sunday morning, guys. And relax into this because we got a lot to unpack here. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about today Susan Sugar and the Good Housekeeping article. Now, Eric, you know that ever since we have busted through this cult thesis and exposed Maury Terry as the really the first class liar that he is, and everybody out there, I have a show coming up tomorrow with John Catalano about Brooklyn. I cannot believe no one's done the work that I did over the last couple of days on reading these Brooklyn police reports. Maury Terry completely lied to us about Brooklyn. I'm going to prove it to you tomorrow night.
What
Okay,
time tomorrow?
6 p.m. normal Manny Monday. Manny Monday. But you know, one of the things that I've been trying to do, Eric, with this video series, ever since we realized that we were lied to, bullied, manipulated, and abused by Maury, is change the perception of David Berkowitz himself. I believe that one of the hurdles that we all had to get over, and what current Maury Terry conspiracy theorists have to get over, in my opinion. Now they don't have to. I don't care what happens. They can continue to keep their heads in the sand forever, as far as I'm concerned. We've moved on here, and I'm taking the rest of the world with me and us. But one of the things that I believe has to be done is to break this perception that Maury Terry gave of Berkowitz as schlub, Berkowitz as innocent bystander, innocent victim of the forces of the world around him. And you can see this in here, although I can kind of see in his face here contempt for Maury as well.
Oh yeah, that's why he makes people dance to Disco Dave's tune, but they don't know that he really up here says, I control you. I'm the Lord of Life.
Correct. Couldn't have put it better myself. And I think that that's what's going on here. Although Maury Terry fans, and I of course included myself as one of them until the last year or so, we're a naive and gullible bunch. And we actually think that this guy Berkowitz was just an innocent patsy, a victim of forces around him. No, I mean, even this modern stuff, Eric, where these evangelists, this is Scott Bond. He's not trying to rehabilitate Berkowitz's image, but these evangelists are putting out videos that Berkowitz is born again. We're gonna discuss that in today's show, because I found something very interesting in this Good Housekeeping article that basically shows that we were bullshitted by Berkowitz about his conversion.
And let me say about Scott Bond,
Yeah,
we have nothing against him. He's just written a book of essays
no, nothing against him.
about America's interest, or even the world's interest, but it's here in America, his book on serial killers, the fascination with it, which goes back to Charles Lindbergh saying Americans are morbid with crime, the fascination with it. So nothing against Scott Bond.
No, but what's your but I mean, look at the way they're portraying this guy. Smiling,
Well, I'm not
happy.
being sarcastic. He looks like he's come down with a disease in just 3 years from that. It's a repulsive photo, and I'm not a cruel person. I've never made fun of anybody's body or looks or debilitation. I really don't. I do that with myself, but not with other people. And I have to say, the only reason why I say repulsive, because I think he is genuinely a bad seed, evil to the core.
I agree
And it's throughout the
1000%.
psychiatric letters. Later on, we'll revisit that letter that shocked you that I happened to find in folder 3. It's sick.
It's totally sick. And let me tell you something, guys. You should be happy that I'm doing this work for you. Now, I really, really suggest that you all read these letters yourself. But this last week, I was deep diving into these letters. I read basically all 1,000 pages of the four folders again. I'm repulsed. I'm feel disgusted and dirty. And I'll
Well,
actually be glad when today's show is over, because I need to like
it does, because you're reading about a sick person. I'm not into the religion or cult of psychology. And even Dr. Chase, Ronald Morton Chase, said the two psychiatrists, defense and plaintiff, they're inferences. How do we scientifically know? They're
exactly.
inferences. It's just philosophical. But it is repulsive to read a sick man talking about, I'm not even going to say it, how he satisfies himself sexually, how he does this or that. It's repulsive.
He's a repulsive person, and I gotta say that Mike Lorenzo really influenced me in our now legendary video about new theories on Son of Sam, up to almost 2.5K views. This is the real Disco Dave right here.
Mm.
This is the Davy boy. This is the Lord of Life that was holding that gun. And I agree 1,000% with the great detective Lorenzo that this is the face that the victim saw.
Oh,
Not,
definitely,
yeah,
definitely. In fact, I'd have to say, as I said to you, a photograph is only the blink of an eye. You could get 1,001 different views of a person with photos. And then how do you take the photo? What if this photo was a profile there to the right, to the left, declined, inclined? How do we know? It could give it the camera captures many different guises, but this is the sick man, the evil man.
I agree. And of course this was I always wondered where this photo was. Lorenzo told me that this was an intake photo at Attica. I gotta believe the guy since he has experience in this field.
Mhm.
But I don't know, like I don't really know the provenance of this photo, but we'll just take Mike Lorenzo as accurate on that.
Mm.
So Eric, we have to so this is exactly the Berkowitz that I want the people of the world to understand. This is the real Lord of Life. This is Disco Dave, not this guy right here who's trolling the world, right? But Eric, Dave, sorry, we have things to talk about today. We got to get into what? The Good Housekeeping article. Well, guys, this is an extremely interesting tangent we're taking now on. It's not even a tangent. It's part of the same river. It's part of the same stream, but we're now going on a little tributary down another road, another avenue here, where we're talking about people in David Berkowitz's orbit as opposed to David himself. Now, today we're going to be talking plenty about Dave, but we're introducing this new character, and this is a very interesting person, in my opinion. And I think we're going to have to unpack this issue of Susan Sugar and her relationship with David Berkowitz over a couple of different shows, Eric. But let's just get into it. Well, first things first. Now, Good Housekeeping. Those of you who are of a certain age probably don't remember the great era of American magazines. And the 1970s were it. I mean, magazines galore. This was how people got their information. And so on and so forth. The internet wasn't around, so these articles were were very big and prominent back then. The magazine and yeah, was very huge. So I want you to understand that Good Housekeeping was and still may be. I don't know. I don't even know if it still exists. A major mainstream publication in the United States in those years, and we can see up here, fellow people of the world. First time ever, the startling story of Son of Sam's real mother, right? And now note the date, November 1978. So it's not that long after his arrest, a year and a couple of months, all right? So a lot of stuff was going on after Disco Dave's arrest in terms of making deals to write articles. And as we're going to explore in further shows, book deals and lawsuits and litigation and who's speaking for who and all sorts of interesting things.
You know
but
what's
this
interesting? Not
yeah
once is the Son of Sam law mentioned, and I researched it, and for years, even before this case, they had been wanting to pass such a law. It's interesting that it's never mentioned.
I'm not sure when that law was passed. I think it might have been passed during this intrigue.
Yeah. And I just want to let people know, you may say, well, why would Good Housekeeping with such an article be about a crime? Well, the owner of this was one of the great newspaper men, along with Joseph Pulitzer alone. It was William Randolph Hearst, the father
Right.
of Patty Hearst. So
the father of yellow journalism.
Yeah, along with Joseph Pulitzer, who slightly preceded him before,
Right.
like the Pulitzer Prize. So, it's all about making money and exciting people. And unless you have minds like yours and mine, no one is going to inquire and say, but wait, this is hearsay. This is a generalization.
Right. And even Disco Dave had opinions of this article, which we'll get into. But let's first dive a little bit into what we know about Susan Sugar, because it's extremely scanty information.
Mm-hmm.
Well, first of all, we have this very tantalizing little bit of information that set my antennas on high alert. Well, Susan Wishengrad Sugar, she lived on Halls Terrace North in Yonkers, New York, which is literally where Maury Terry said that these nests were of the high-level Satanists, the high-level occultists, the doctors, the lawyers, the judges, the politicians. He named Halls Terrace North as the northern terminus of what he called the nests in North Yonkers. She lived right there. This is huge, first of all, to me in the way that I think, because we were always told that Berkowitz moved to Yonkers. He didn't know anybody. He didn't have any relatives. He didn't have anybody there. It was a random move. Now, I'm not saying that he knew Susan. In fact, the evidence is showing that he didn't. But don't you find it a little curious that he ended up 2 or 3 blocks away from where his cousin-in-law lived?
Oh, yes, it's very, very curious. I mean, and we're not being conspiratorial, but we just want to know every fact. It could be that the relatives said, "Oh, we know a place that's for rent. You'll be near us."
You'll be near us. Exactly. He was in the midst of knowing his biological family during this time period when he moved to Yonkers.
He was very close to his Aunt Mary, who is Mary Sugar, maiden name Broda, the sister of Betty Falco Broda, his biological mother. And, she was Susan's mother-in-law.
Correct. Susan married Robert, his first biological cousin.
Mhm.
So this is the first thing we know about Susan Wishengrad Sugar is that she lived 3 blocks away, 4 blocks away from Disco Dave. I find that extremely curious. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I'm not saying anything. I'm not making any claims here. Okay. But remember, this episode is about the mysterious. Its intention is to make you think. Okay. And hey, if you want to get conspiratorial, I've gone there too with this as well. Okay. Let's have fun. But
Mhm.
remember that we deal with fact, with things that can be verified and proved. We don't traffic in conspiracy theory. And I can go either way, but it all depends on where the evidence goes. And I'm not quite sure we're ever going to have full evidence because we don't have access, unfortunately, to Mrs. Susan Wishengrad Sugar. Hopefully that changes very soon.
And
But
also, for those who think that you might be exaggerating or making something bigger than it is, and likewise think that of me, no, because we're taking as a fact that they hardly even knew each other, but yet there's no other relative. The closest that comes to it is the spiritual father, Nat Berkowitz. There's no other relative who is as intimate with him in letters and who has such knowledge
deep knowledge of his
as Susan
psychiatry.
Sugar Wishengrad. She does it the Anglo-Saxon way, Wishengrad Sugar. But nobody else. That's the mystery. That's why you're right to be curious about.
Especially since she lived 2, 3 blocks, 4 blocks away from Disco Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, if she lived in Iowa, there wouldn't be such a mystery here. But the fact that her and her husband lived on Hall's Terrace, but even that's a mystery because we're gonna see that Disco Dave says that they lived on Roberts Avenue. So right here, so here's a little more we know, right? No, this is Disco Dave writing. So Good Housekeeping ran, and this is him writing to Dr. Abrahamson. Good Housekeeping ran an article about me a year ago. The article said nothing bad about me personally. It portrayed me as a mentally sick person not responsible for my acts. I always wondered who the author was. Then I found out. My cousin. It was written by Susan Sugar of Roberts Avenue, Yonkers. I'll send you the article. It was a love story about me and my natural mother, Betty Falco. My mom and sister did most of the talking. Once again, my mom appears to be thinking for herself. So here he says Roberts Avenue. So I would like to know, was it Roberts Avenue or was it Hall's Terrace North? Samantha B, no, she does not. No, she no longer lives on Hall's Terrace. We actually spoke to the people who
Yeah, I spoke to the people. I phoned their home,
current occupants of
and the current occupant, very lovely lady, said, "No, we bought the house from her, and from the Sugars in
from the Sugars.
1993."
Right, and that was where that stood.
Hmm.
So now here's what we know again, because Susan Sugar is a ghost. If you look her up, basically this is all there is on her entire life on the internet. This is all there is, and she's basically a footnote, a little paragraph in a book by Alex Jackinson, who I've never heard of, but apparently was a very famous literary agent. And
Hmm.
this is called The Romance of Publishing, an agent with 33 years. Someone called Jason Goodman. An agent recalls 33 years with authors and editors. Actually, I'm finding that to be a little strange myself. So here's the Cornwall books, and it was written in 1986, 1987. So it's relatively soon after all this happened, roughly about 10 years. Now, this is a very interesting passage. When Arthur Bremer gunned down George Wallace, he was reported to have exclaimed, "Now I will become known. How much do you think I'm going to get for my autobiography?" And becoming known was certainly going to help him get published. Indeed, the prestigious Harper's Magazine Press published An Assassin's Diary. Here's important. I never had an opportunity to represent this twisted fellow, but Bremer was one author I wanted to have no contact with whatsoever. I loathe the thought of representing a writer who needed a blazing gun to focus attention on himself. I did have a fringe opportunity to be involved with The Son of Sam. Good Housekeeping had paid $8,000. We're going to deal with that in a second. $8,000 to run an article called The Startling Story of Son of Sam's Real Mother. The display copy read, David Berkowitz murdered 6 people and maimed 7. Not until he was caught did Betty Falco learn he was the son she'd given up 24 years earlier by Susan Wishengrad. Susan Wishengrad had come to me on an esteemed recommendation. Fortunately, she was not a client to whom I owed any special consideration. Had she been, I would have overcome my reluctance. But for other aspiring writers, there is a clear lesson to keep plugging, especially in the face of rejection by an agent.
And I
So,
find ambiguity here.
well, before we get into that, I want to just deal with this $8,000 sum because I did the inflation calculator. If in 1978 I purchased an item for $8,000, and in 2022 the item would cost $36,340. So Gabrielle said that they paid a pretty penny for this. She got paid $36,340 or somewhere thereabouts for this article. That is a huge amount of money. Now, Eric, so what are your thoughts on this that we just read?
No, good that you did that inflation calculation, because they do talk the way families do about money in the letters.
We'll talk about that in a second.
Here we go. He says, I loathe the thought of representing a writer who needed a blazing gun to focus attention on himself. He loathes it. But then that last paragraph where he speaks of Susan Wishengrad, he says, had she been, I would have overcome my reluctance. I thought he loathes it. But for other aspiring writers, there is a clear lesson to keep plugging, especially in the face of a rejection by an agent. He loathes it, but then he would have considered her.
Well, I think that it was, I think that ultimately this is a guy that wants to make money at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. I've become severe, not uncharitable, not without kindness. I'm severe the more I study this case. It opens me up with all these people.
I agree, but this is a paragraph that the viewer is going to want to keep in mind. Not, don't constantly think about it. But we're going to come back to this because Susan Wishengrad, in her letters to David Berkowitz, she basically, I think, had a lot of anger about the way she was treated by this Jackinson, and we'll deal with that in a little bit. But anyway, she got paid $36,340. Oh, wait, well, this is actually where we're going to deal with it. So Susan explains herself to Disco Dave. This is just a little excerpt. Now, we want to set the table here before we get into the article itself, right? And boy, do we have a lot to unpack in that article. But we want to set the stage. We're setting the table. We're setting up this whole thing where this article is coming into focus, and we're seeing the intrigue and the backstory behind the article. So check this out. If this is one place where you don't need to read between the lines, as she suggested to Disco Dave. So here she is talking about trying to get the article published. Okay, now check this out. But as time moved on, I knew the article would be worth less and less money, and worse, would have less and less chance of being published altogether. It would be considered old news, and no self-respecting magazine is ever interested in old, stale news. As a matter of fact, that's what happened. People who had been somewhat interested in the beginning later told us they were no longer interested. So she's referring, I think, to this Jackinson guy, right?
Yeah.
And I had to work very hard to sell it, as I finally did, to Good Housekeeping, which I still consider a miracle after all the things we'd gone through and all the time had passed. Now, check this out. I can tell you frankly that we did not make a bundle, but whatever we made, we shared equally, something that no other author would have done for Betty and Roz. That's his mother and his sister. In fact, they ended up with much more than 50%, since I declared the entire amount in my own name and paid taxes on it myself, and since I had incurred at least $100 worth of expenses. That's a bold-faced lie. She made $36,000.
$100 worth of expenses? But she has drive. This is a woman who has drive. She persisted to get Good Housekeeping and to tell the true story of his biological mother, Betty. But yet, once again, also, as we will see, no sympathy for the victims, not once.
But I just wonder why she's lying to Disco Dave here. She didn't make a bundle. My butt, 36,340. And even if she gave away 50% to Betty and Roz, like she said, she's still coming away with close to $18,000. Oh, but poor Susan, she incurred $100 worth of expenses. I would love, even now in 2022, to pay $100 and get $15,000 back. So I don't know.
It could be, Manny, that if you go through the letters, even when we get to Klausner, there's all this discussion about making money with books,
Mm-hmm.
even to the point, absurdly, of wanting to take Klausner to court for writing a book. And it's all cloak and dagger over money and book publishing, and therefore that's why she could have written that.
Right, exactly. But I find it to be very duplicitous on her part, very sneaky, to use a word that we'll come back to later, Eric.
Mhm,
On
mhm.
her part, she's out and outright lying to Disco Dave right here. I can tell
Yeah.
you frankly that we did not make a bundle. That is an out and out lie.
Mhm.
And so that makes her suspect to me in other things that she says, okay?
Oh, greatly so.
Right, because she's already shown to be a liar here and a manipulator. I think that part of this paragraph up here. Now, this is just my interpretation, okay? But and we'll analyze the greater letter, not today, but the greater letter that this came from. This is all manipulation into saying to Dave, "You're nothing," right? It's only because of me that I got interest in you. But in
Mhm,
reality, the world's moved on, Disco Dave. You're no longer big news. You're old, stale news.
mhm, mhm.
Imagine how Disco Dave felt reading that.
Uh, Definitely, definitely, and in fact, I often wonder if he sat back and laughed because he knew that he was never going to be old news.
Well, he certainly isn't. I mean, as is evidenced by our video series. Anyway, let's carry on. This is interesting stuff. So this is one of the things that I wanted to find out about when in doing this research that I felt was actually very important. Part of the story was when exactly Disco Dave read the article. So I found the answer in a letter, a June 14th, 1979 article letter that he wrote to his dad. Okay, and we can see that here, dear Dad. Right. So second, after reading the Good Housekeeping article about 8 months ago, okay, I repeatedly asked my aunt's sister about who wrote it. Blah blah blah. I think I told you before, but I had to find out about Susan Sugar, the author, from Bernice, his girlfriend, who he does sneaky things with because my family never gave me a reply. I had asked Bernice to do some snooping on her own. She contacted a party who later found out about the article's writer. See how I had to do this? So my sister and mother are in fact hiding something. So he read the article literally like the month it was published. He found out about it right away and read it right away. Because if you backdate 8 months from June 14th, it actually takes you to October, which is a month before the article was published. So
Mhm.
we can say that he read the article right away, which means that he was obsessed with any media portrayal of him whatsoever. And
I'm
I think
100% in agreement with you. And even if he hadn't known of the article, I guarantee his lawyers and others would have informed him immediately.
exactly. So he read this article right at publication, which means that he read this article before he started writing all of these letters to Abrahamson.
And look the way he speaks of, I had to find out about Susan Sugar, the author, from Bernice. There he's admitting, and it's not an estrangement, but not knowing who this cousin-in-law is.
Correct. This is evidence that he didn't know who Susan Sugar was. Now, I have questions about that, Eric. I have
Oh, I have
serious.
questions. I have serious, serious questions.
Yeah, I
Because
just want the audience to
what
know that.
yeah,
I'm
you go
sorry,
ahead.
Eric. Let me finish. I just want the audience to know that I am of the opinion that there's a mystery here between the relationship between Susan and David. I'm not trying to fit facts for that narrative. I'm just stating as an honest person to my audience who I respect and care for that this is where my mindset is at. But it might change, and it will change if I don't get the evidence that proves the thesis that I have in my head. But right now, I think that there's more to the relationship between Susan and David than either one of them are letting on.
I completely, completely agree to you. And that came out with last Sunday's The Family reading her letters.
She
It,
knew so many things about him, the way she was talking to him.
yeah, there was too much. It wasn't as if she was, and there's no way with how she wrote in a detailed manner that she got this from the family. These details. It's as if she's writing almost maybe a short novel. about somebody. She really writes well. She knows too much about him. Plus he was close to her mother-in-law, Aunt Mary Sugar in Flushing.
Right.
I agree with you for now that there was a close relationship, that they did know each other well.
I mean, I just can't envision a scenario where it didn't come up. Like, hey, Dave. Well, they called him Richie, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes.
Mhm.
Richie, wow, you're in the Bronx. One of my sister lives up in my daughter lives up in Yonkers. Why don't you get in touch with her? Bronx is close to Yonkers.
Mhm.
I could see that happening. Now we have no proof of it, and in fact, David and Susan, they both intimate and outright say that they didn't know each other. But then why is Susan asking him to read between the lines? And I'm afraid of what people are going to see in these letters. But we got to get to that in another episode, because we have a
I
lot.
won't. I won't break up what we discovered last week. We may be at the tail end, but I suggest people go and see the show, last week's show on the letters. It blew our minds away.
Right. I agree. Well, anyway, so let's carry it on. Now, here's an interesting letter that Berkowitz wrote about the article. So this is May 22nd, 1979. Dear Dr. Abrahamson, this article, short story, was written by my mother's sister's daughter-in-law. Her real name is Susan Sugar of Yonkers, but she used her maiden name. I didn't know about the article until my conservator got it for me. My mom never mentioned anything about it to me. Betty Falco is really very sneaky.
Sneaky.
There it is. That, like mother, like son.
And the conservator is Mrs. Doris Johnson.
Correct. Now, here's where he writes, this story isn't offensive, but it is inaccurate. My mom also made a nice amount of money off this. While you can't trust everybody, this is going to become very interesting when we deal with the way Berkowitz felt about his mother. Okay. Anyway, but this is what I wanted to talk about here. The story isn't offensive, but it is inaccurate. Inaccurate. We're going to read parts of this article. We're not going to read the whole thing. What I've done is I've culled out the most eye-opening and important parts. And then we're going to go back and see what David Berkowitz had to say in his letters to Abrahamson, right? And we're going to see how inaccurate this article really was. I have questions about that. I think this article is extremely accurate. And that's what gives me, again, more ammunition to think that she knew more about him than they're letting on.
Oh, I think it is very, very accurate. And he's playing with Dr. Abrahamson because perhaps he wants to feed him different information about his family. Because we've established he's not really a patient of his. There's a relationship. But look at this sentence, though. My mom also made a nice amount of money off of this. He knows that she made money.
Well, and he also knows that she made a nice amount, and which she did. They made $36,000 off of this article.
That's right. And there are people, as I thought about, maybe a lawyer told him, who are following everything that he might not know that's going on, like his conservator, Doris Johnson, informing him of the article.
Right. Now, I just want to make sure that everybody understands when I say 36,000, I do not mean 36,000 1977 US dollars. I mean $8,000 US 1977, which translates to $36,000 today. Okay, everybody, just got to make that clear. Now, this is for the conspiracy heads out there. This one is for those who are still in the Maury Terry camp, because obviously we can't keep Maury Terry out of these discussions completely, because her name comes up in his Queens DA file. This is part of Maury Terry's Queens DA file, and it's subtitled Untermeyer Park. This is extremely mysterious to me.
Mm-hmm.
Burke has written that we are correct on the interpretation of the first sentence of the Breslin letter. He also says he knows a lot of people on Palisades, Roberts Avenue, near there, Susie S. near there, and others. Now, who's this Susie S.? Is this Susan Sugar? And the reason why I ask that is because he says in the next paragraph, Burke says that Bernice called Susan Sugar and told her not to cooperate with you people, meaning the Queen's DA. Implication is that Susan knows something. perhaps something she isn't even aware of. So there's Maury again saying that people are aware of something that they're not aware of. I mean, this is all kind of strange to me. But there's two things in this that bother me. One, if he knew in 1979 that Berkowitz knew a lot of people on Palisades Roberts Avenue, how come he didn't say that in The Ultimate Evil? He couched more Berkowitz's move to Yonkers as a total mystery, right? That's manipulation. That's selective editing. But why does he say Susie S near there, right? Which we would think is Susan Sugar, but then he names Susan Sugar here. I don't understand this.
That's what annoys me about his writing. He won't give the full names. He'll abbreviate, or he'll say, for example, let's say somebody picks this up, Burke.
Right.
Burke who?
Well, we're supposed to know that means Berkowitz,
but that's a habit of his in his writings. He doesn't give full names. You want to know who you're talking about. Who is Susan S? Yeah, maybe there's another Susan S. Truthfully, it's not conspiratorial, but he does name Roberts Avenue, and it is strange that yes, he doesn't mention it in The Ultimate Evil, but once again, though, he is revealing something that we found in one of the letters that he had Bernice.
Right, Bernice was the go between Disco Dave and Susan Sugar.
Yeah.
Right. Unless, of course, getting conspiratorial, he didn't want to have direct contact with Susan Sugar because it would be too dangerous. They were involved together in Son of Sam somehow. Again, conspiratorial, right? But I don't understand why he says Susie S here. Who's this Susie S? If it's not Susan Sugar, who is it?
That's right. Yeah.
And if it is Susan Sugar, why did he write Susie S here and Susan Sugar here in the same paragraph? This makes no sense to me. But again, Maury Terry was clearly in 1979 aware that Berkowitz had relatives in Yonkers, New York, living quite close to him. So we were lied to again in the Ultimate Evil, and I've just proven it. All right, guys. Anything you want to add before we get into the nut meat?
No, because that little piece there makes me think about what he knew, who was giving him this information, and how he was giving it to us in a very slipshod manner or manipulative manner. That's to the Queen's District Attorney. He's trying to stir them up.
Right.
You know,
why not just give him the damn answers if you know them?
That's right.
But of course, that's what he did with all of us. You know, just like we danced to Disco Dave's tune, we also danced to Maury Terry's tune as well. We were all little puppets on his strings.
That's why I believe he becomes historically, and I'm not playing mind games, it's a fact, the alter ego of David Berkowitz.
Correct. The two of them fed off each other brilliantly, and with very negative results for a lot of people, including Maury Terry. I mean, let's face it, the guy did not have a good life because of this case.
No, he fell into a dark abyss that he could not climb out of.
And it seems like he wanted to in the beginning. Remember, he writes, "Get on. I wish you guys would deal with this so I could get on with my life." Anyway, the damage he did was incalculable, and it's been very difficult to correct the damage. But we're doing it, Eric. We're doing it every day with our exploding viewership, subscriber base, the amount of positivity that I get from the not only the old viewers but all the new viewers as well. And the new viewers are great because they're not coming to this with the baggage of having been Ultimate Evil fans. So their minds are open. It's a wonderful new audience to speak to. I'm so glad that the stalwarts from the old series came on, and we have all these wonderful new people as well. All right. So listen, what we're going to do, guys, there's 10 pages of this story. No, we are not going to read every paragraph or word, because you can do that yourself. The great Ruby has put the link to these articles and where you can get them, and you could read them for yourself. What I've done is I've taken the greatest hits out of each page, and then we are going to then go back to what Disco Dave said in his letters and relate the two and see how much they correlate with one another. Because Disco Dave, the Lord of Life, said this was an inaccurate story. Well, let's
Mhm.
see how inaccurate it really was.
If I could just answer Dr. Chase, these letters are written to specific people. All letters that we have are written to specific people. They're not generalizations.
Okay, I didn't see Dr. Chase's question,
Yeah,
but it was
mhm,
probably up there. Up there,
yeah.
most of the time I'm not paying attention to the chat, guys. So just
I just quoted.
no offense.
Mhm.
All right. I see you guys all having a great time in the chat, and hey, have at it. But yeah, we have to concentrate on the show most of the time. So page 1. All right, now we're gonna unpack some things that we've never unpacked before about Disco Dave's life and thoughts and history. So, of course, this deals with his natural father. Soon after, Betty met a man named Joe, Jewish, married, with 3 children and a wife who refused to give him a divorce. For the next 29 years and until his death, Joe would spend his free hours with Betty and then return. Okay, we don't need to read the rest of it. Now, check this out. Now, the relationship between Betty and Joe is interesting, and we're going to get into it in a second. But here she is continuing. It was by no means an ideal relationship, but it helped to fill the void. Where
Mhm.
have I heard that one before? Oh, yeah. Whoops. The Breslin letter.
Mhm.
I love my work. Now the void has been filled.
Yeah,
Now,
and then
now,
it also there's no explanation. Did she meet Joe after Tony Falco left during the marriage?
did who meet Joe?
Betty meets Kleinman, right?
Yeah, I,
And
I,
was she still married to Tony Falco, or had Falco left already?
I think Falco had already left her by this point.
Okay.
But this just popped out at me. I thought it was a very strange thing to write in this article. I mean, yeah, fill the void is a term, right?
Mhm.
But how is she unaware that that was in the Son of Sam letter? It would seem to be a gratuitous thing to put that in there, almost like a hint, almost like a little nod to something,
Mhm.
right? Now the void has been filled. Now, again, I'm being conspiratorial here. I know that you guys aren't used to that, right? Given where I am in Son of Sam, but I have questions about the relationship between Susan and Disco Dave. I
Well,
wonder whether they knew each other in Yonkers, and if they knew each other, how close were they?
if I
Did
can
sh
defend you, I don't think you're being conspiratorial. I think you're being analytical about facts that are presented to you in these letters, in these writings. And you can't help but wonder because
exactly.
because there's no one else. She's not supposed to know Berkowitz. They don't know each other. But as I said, there's no other relative where we have such intimacy and knowledge of each other as between David Berkowitz and Susan Sugar.
Exactly. So this was just something that really shouted out at me as a former conspiratorialist turned lone gunman theorist. I just found that a weird thing, a weird turn of phrase to use. But let's move on. Let's deal with Joseph Kleinman. Because listen, this is Psychiatric Sunday. We're going deep into the mind of Dave, we're learning things about him that we never knew before. My mother Falco was sitting in those parked cars with Kleinman. Greedy, wild-tempered Kleinman. It was that bastard who I took after. His temper, his impatience. He hated crowds and probably people too. When I finally found Betty Falco, I was told that Joseph Kleinman had died. Not only did he die, but he died a horrid death. He perished from cancer of the rectum. From what my sister and Betty told me, he had quite a painful death. It was also a prolonged one. When I found this out, I no longer had any anger to him. Fate, God, or whatever had taken its course. He suffered. It settled. So clearly had a lot of anger towards his natural father.
Definitely, definitely. And that's May 22nd, 1979 to Abrahamson, that
Cor-
writing.
Correct. Natural father, Joseph Kleinman. Never met him. He refused to let my mother keep me. He died of cancer of the rectum around 1970. He died a painful, agonizing death. He had 3 children who were all grown up and in their 40s. One son lives in Suffolk County. 2 daughters live in Florida. I never met them. Kleinman was very skillful with his hands and with tools. This is the opposite of me. Nat Berkowitz knew nothing about my natural father, Kleinman. And let's continue on, because this is an interesting relationship that Kleinman had with Betty, which I never knew about. I always thought that they had a one-night stand in the back of a parked car, but no, quite the opposite.
Mhm.
Joseph Kleinman, my father, was very handy with his hands, while I'm not. But I have to tell you of his relationship with my mom and sister. The story sounds like fiction, but it's not. Betty and Joe stayed together for almost 30 years. So his mother and his real father, even though they weren't married, and he was married with 3 other kids, he had a relationship with her for 30 years.
An adulterous one. I wonder what
Correct.
did his wife know?
Well, we're going to talk about that. But Joe was still married to another woman, and Betty's husband ran off decades earlier.
There's my
There's your answer. Joe's wife was totally aware of the relationship and even condoned it. Nothing was done behind the back of Kleinman's legal wife, whose name I never learned. So this puts a lie to the theory that Berkowitz was born out of, he was born out of wedlock, but it wasn't a one-night stand in the back of a parked car. It was a deep relationship that these people had.
Mhm.
Joe's 3 kids, a son and 2 daughters, used to go up to Betty's little apartment to eat almost every day. So Joe's 3 kids from his natural wife hung out at Betty's. My sister, of similar age to Joe's kids, was there too. All of them, Betty, Joe, my sister, and the other kids, used to eat there and alternate between homes. They loved Betty's kasha, a Jewish dish, and her split pea soup. I do have to admit that I tried this stuff myself, and it sure was good. When Joe died after a long illness, at the funeral parlor, my mother and sister went, but with all due respect, sat in the rear of the funeral home. As I said, the relationship was known by everyone in the neighborhood and by Kleinman's family. It was pretty open and perhaps even a bit scandalous, but it was accepted. By the way, my mother never even mentioned to me that she and Joe's legal wife met face to face at the funeral home. However, nothing was said. That was also part of the arrangement. In the end, Kleinman gave all his money to his frigid wife, leaving my mother, who was at his deathbed daily, with nothing. Betty almost had a nervous breakdown because after nearly 30 years, he left her zero. She was shocked and broke. My mom fed him, clothed him, copulated with him, and waited on the irresponsible bum. After all these decades, he shoved everything back in her face. That's messed up, man.
Yeah, a 30-year relationship. About when did he die? Do we know?
1970.
So
So
the relationship goes back to 1940 approximately, before World War II.
it would seem so. And although I'm not sure of that timeline, because I think I remember Richie Falco, the father, or whatever his name was. I always read that he left in 1950, but again, I could be wrong about that. And so here again, we want more information about this. This was huge to me because how do I explain this? It doesn't make his justifications for murdering legitimate, in my opinion.
Many are born from another father or another mother, and some of them never even grow up to be angry, bitter people.
Right.
There's no justification from this for what he did to those poor people, murdered,
Right.
and those who survived. Nothing.
Right. And he said it was because of the parked cars and his mother with that parked car with Kleinman. That's the first thing I read on this subject today. Why do you suppose that Kleinman never left my mom any money or security after 30 years? How could he not? How could someone be so cruel, spiteful, and selfish? Something must have happened, like father, like son. Something must have happened between Betty and Joe. Perhaps it was something traumatic. I mean, traumatic. He had plenty of money. His kids were grown. He had a will prepared and plenty of other financially secure resources. Yet she didn't get a dime. Why? My mom got nothing while his frigid wife got it all. This is a mystery. But perhaps Berkowitz's best and most rational observation of the entire psychiatric letters was this right here. There was one piece of the puzzle that I cannot understand. Since my natural parents' 30-year relationship was fairly open and known by almost everyone, why then was there shame in keeping me, as my mother seems to secretly believe? Surely many people in their neighborhood and their families knew of the affair. No one could have, under these circumstances, have been so naive to think that sex between Joe and Betty was non-existent. Kleinman spent all his time there at Betty's apartment. He almost certainly slept over too. So what was the shame with my birth? Truly, it's a mystery. And because of my mother's secretiveness, and because when she's questioned, she becomes protective and evasive, it's so hard to decipher the truth from her white lies. So I think that that's a very, very great observation.
Yeah,
Um,
it is. This is a lot. It is a logical observation. Plus, how does he know what the finances of Kleiman were when he said,
he must have just gleaned that, or people told him. I mean, he
Mhm.
maybe the mother told him, and then maybe the mother was lying. I mean, yeah, a great question. I actually don't know the answer to it.
But in those days, people commonly gave up children for adoption if they had more than one child for various reasons. And also, as soon as there's a child present, there's a peculiar look that people have on that person having a child out of wedlock back then.
Right.
You know,
But at the same time, he does ask a legit question.
oh,
If the relationship was sanctioned and everyone knew about it, why didn't Betty keep the kid?
that's right. But but then I noticed a paragraph down on this letter that I didn't have last week,
Mhm.
where he says, "Really, I'm very much like my mother, sneaky.
Right. Right.
In fact, uh, my nicknames, as sometimes said by my adoptive father, Nathan, are Sneaky, Snoop, and Spy. I couldn't even get food from the kitchen when son was in that room. I had to wait despite hunger pains, sometimes an hour until the kitchen was vacated before I'd move in for a snack. I highlighted that because the word sneaky, I've never known two people, him and Susan, using that word so often.
Right.
So
Sneaky.
it's like a literary style, as if they wrote together. Sneaky, sneaky this, sneaky that.
Yes, sneaky. They love that word sneaky. I agree. There are literary tells between Berkowitz and Susan Wishengrad Sugar that are too close for comfort, in my opinion. And also, another thing that struck me when you just read that, Eric, was that if you substitute food for victims, he was describing how he killed. He was
Oh,
sneaky.
definitely.
Yeah. I
Oh,
mean, it's unbelievable. See what happens, Eric, and the audience and the wider audience out there. When you open your mind to let this new information in, look how interesting it gets. We're actually getting somewhere in this investigation for the
and
first
he
time in
mentioned the word
45 years.
spy. Spy.
Right.
He
Right.
went on, I got the right word. I was always saying like advanced military. Susan London clicked my mind. I couldn't reconnaissance. He went on a reconnaissance mission when he studied Queens County and where he was going to shoot the streets and everything. And,
Exactly.
and this, I wonder if this is a kind of, shall I say, and this is not conspiratorial, code talk.
Interesting. Okay. All right, so now we're on page 2, and this page has some very interesting passages on it. Number 1, with time, the shock wore off. For the next 22 years, Betty and Rosalind continued their struggle to survive. Oh, where did I see 22 before? Oh, in the Breslin letter again, the 22 disciples of hell, right?
Mhm.
Now, again, I'm not saying anything, but this is the second time in this article within 2 pages where she uses terms from the Son of Sam letters. I'm just noticing it, guys. I'm not making any editorial comments. That's for you guys to unpack in your own heads. All I'm saying is this is weird.
Yeah.
Now, here, we don't have to go into this whole thing here, just for interest of time, but this is a passage where she basically shows that even in 1975, this guy was sending letters and writing people letters and putting them in the mail to send to them private and writing them poetry. And, like David Berkowitz was a letter writer. He was a prolific letter writer. And I think that this right here shows that he was at least doing it to 1975, right? So
Yeah.
I found that interesting.
Mhm.
Now, look at this. This is not something that we're going to read fully. But again, the literary tells between Berkowitz and Susan Sugar are too close for my comfort. So in this passage that we just read before, she writes 22, right, for the next 22 years. And now this isn't the only time she does that in that article. She puts 22 in at
Mhm.
least 2 or 3 more times. Look at how what he writes. It's the exact same thing. If it took me 24 years to finally explode, then it will take many more to heal. The explosion was in the making for 24 years, right? Like, I don't know. It just seems too close for comfort. 24 years to erupt, right? 24, 24, 24. 3 times in 2 paragraphs, he writes the number.
There's a calculation of time.
It's just, I don't know, it's just a little too similar for my opinion. Again, getting conspiratorial here, and I don't want to do that because I like to stick to facts, things that I can actually prove using this stuff here. But
Mhm.
remember, I'm an old school head, guys. I came to this as a Maury Terry fan. So therefore that still exists in my head a little bit. Okay? And when I see these things, I'm going to point them out. And you, the audience, can decide whether there's something here or not. I have not made up my mind yet either way.
Well, he's also selling himself. Oh no, this is D, the late D channel he wrote this to. And she's interested in crime, and they talk of the True Detective magazine and so
Right. I mean, it's the pointless. The whole reason I wanted to show this was to show that he does the same thing that Susan Wishengrad does. He puts 24, 24, 24. She puts 22 right after the paragraph where she put fill the void. I mean, I don't know. Something here is strange. But then there's this whole issue of Jewishness, which no Son of Sam researcher before Eric and I have ever even touched with David Berkowitz. And I find this to be extremely interesting, especially given the fact that we now know his childhood friends. And that'll come in a second.
only until recently did people actually believe, because it was reported so badly, that he was half Italian and half Hebrew.
Correct. He's a full-on Hebrite Jew. I mean, I'm half Jewish. I can say it that way. So Jewishness. So check this out. This is very interesting. He wanted an alternate ego. He wanted a different identity when he met his natural mother. So this is Susan saying that David Berkowitz asked them, his natural family, to call him Richard, the name Betty had given him. Within weeks, they were calling him Richie. Okay. So now he takes on a whole different identity. He's no longer David Berkowitz with his family. He's Richie Falco.
Mm-hmm.
At the time so this is David writing about that. So I found this. And so how inaccurate is this article? First of all, this article so far is extremely accurate. So number 4, at the time that I sought out and found my natural family, in quotes, when I was feeling down and out and lonely, when I finally located them and spoke to my mother and sister, I was eager to be accepted and eager to meet them. When I first met my mother, I was disappointed, of course. However, my sister was very attractive. This impressed me. Yes, I thought I might be able to find a new identity. I was pleased with the new nickname of Richie. I never used a nickname in my life. So he got off on being called this new character. He had this new identity, Richie Falco.
Mm-hmm.
No longer did Disco Dave exist. He was now Richie. But we're going to see that Richie and David, well, they were one and the same. Jewishness. People believe or think that I do not feel Jewish. I do. I always knew I was a Jew, but I'm not a proud Jew. I'm not proud because I feel like a worthless hypocrite. Jews are supposed to be honest, law-abiding, and respectful of parents. I am none of these. I am a disgrace. I know. All right, so let's unpack this even more. I never felt Jewish. Well, wait a second.
Yeah, I just thought there. It's just like going to the Baptist church in Kentucky, and then I was repulsed. I prefer Alistair Crowley to St. John of the Cross.
Right, Eric, I love when this stuff happens live on the air, when we just realize these things just from reading them. So here he is contradicting himself in the same letter. Well, very similar letters. I never felt Jewish, whether I was in a synagogue or not, whether it was a holiday or not. I never felt Jewish. Rather, I rejected my Judaism because of all the ridicule I faced in school. There were many anti-Semitic remarks. Those Catholic kids were always passing nasty remarks about the Jews. I can attest to that growing up in a very Irish Catholic neighborhood. We were mercilessly attacked by the Catholic school kids. Even in the 80s, it was the same bit. I had to rebel against my own Jewishness, but I am not proud of this. No, I never felt Jewish at my bar mitzvah. I tried to fast on Yom Kippur, but without success. I fasted for about 1 hour. Then by 7 in the evening, I was headed for the refrigerator. However, my parents never saw me take any food. I snuck into the kitchen and stole a nosh. They always thought I held out my feet at fast until the morning at least. So here he is using Jewish terminology,
Mm,
saying that he didn't feel like a Jew.
mhm,
But what I find interesting about this is this passage. What you ask here as to me rebelling against Judaism because of my adoption. This may be true, what you ask. I can't say for certain why I developed a dislike for being Jewish when I was a child, but I did, and my father knows this too. Often asked my parents if my maternal parents were Jewish. I remember asking this often. However, back then, my adoptive parents assured me that I was totally Jewish. Here's a very interesting passage, Eric, that I've been wanting to deal with now for months.
mhm.
I also remember as a child that I felt proud to hang around with the Gentile boys. Now, Gentile means non-Jewish. When I hung out and played ball with the non-Jews, this caused my grandparents to get upset. My adoptive father's mother was always putting the Gentiles down, but I continued to befriend them and reject Judaism. Now, this I find interesting because, well, we know his childhood friends now, his teenage friends.
Mm, yeah,
Comparetto,
mhm,
Dapolito,
mhm,
Snedeker, which I don't think was Jewish. Now, he did have Hartenberg and Trepper,
mhm.
okay? But
Denota, later
Denota, but
life.
right, but he had all of these like Italian like friends, and I've been wanting to speak to these guys, especially Comparetto and Dapolito, for months now about this, because I wanted to unpack this a little more with the guys who actually knew him. But unfortunately, we're not hearing back from these guys. It's a shame, but
Well,
it is what it is.
two facts. Unfortunately, this is the culture of, let's say, the city of New York. All of these at that time, more than today, fighting this and that. We can't generalize about the Irish. I know the real Irish from Ireland, and I've know
I
all
love
that.
the Irish. I love
But
the
the
Irish,
fact
but
of the matter is that if you go back to his generation, a Jew from New York will say, "Well, everybody was prejudiced against us except for the Italians."
right, exactly.
And there was it's the city of New York culture which actually ends up destroying those cultures in a respect. Look at them, look at that one. But no, it's quite interesting. This is typical Lord of Life Disco Dave. he
Right.
he will write one thing to one to another. Now, did he write both of these to Abrahamson about Jewishness?
Yeah, these are all to Abrahamson.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we're dealing with a personality that is quite sick. It's no different by analogy than him saying how he loves women, but if I was out of jail, I'd murder them.
Exactly. But I just would love to know like more now about this phenomenon of him befriending Gentiles and feeling proud to be around Gentiles. I would like to know if his friends Comparetto and Dapolito had any insight into that, whether they talked about that as kids, whether this is the beauty of our video series, above and beyond any other Son of Sam series that exists now or existed ever in the history. We actually are speaking to the primary sources. So I would love to get the insight of these two guys on this, and maybe I will. We'll see what
Well,
happens.
Comparetto hasn't been around, and I did speak to Lenny Dapolito's ex-wife, and
Right.
she actually called me back and got in touch with him
Yeah,
and
but he
said,
never
"Oh,
he never he never
called
got in touch with us,
me." He
unfortunately.
he never called me.
Right. But anyway, this next passage here is something that I've been wanting to bring up for a long, long time, and we finally found the perfect opportunity because it's in the article. Now, this speaks to Disco Dave's meticulous, obsessive nature to hunt. Okay, you're gonna say he couldn't do the Son of Sam? Check this out. He explained from the day he learned he was adopted, finding his real parents had been his goal. Many times he had asked his father to give him the adoption papers. His father always refused. When Nat Berkowitz was about to move to Florida, he finally gave the papers to his son. So here she writes, David called every Falco in the phone book, asking for Betty or Tony. He did research in libraries, poured through old books, compared them with new ones, imploring the phone company for information. Now, I would just like to know how she knew all this if she didn't know David, right? Because this so-called inaccurate article, right? This so-called inaccurate passage, according to Disco Dave, the Lord of Life,
is very accurate.
it's extremely accurate. In fact, check this out. This is written by Disco Dave. There was something deeper than just searching for my natural family. I mean, there were hundreds of Alma members who were searching too. However, I don't think many of them sought out their roots like I did. I had totally devoted myself to the hunt. He uses the word hunt. It took everything out of me, and I worked around the clock. In my hunt, I divorced myself from all other cares, except the basic ones. I neglected my studies and just spent my time running down leads and daydreaming what it would be like to see my natural family and what they look like. Finding my mother was a necessity, an extreme one that I cannot fully explain. Obviously, it was much more than just locating her. It was much more. Now, that's not even the end of it. Check this out. Now, we're not going to go through every thing here for interest of time, but for those of you who are interested in the psychiatric letters, Disco Dave goes through every process to find his mother. It's literally, I had to break it up into 3 pages because it was too long. How I found my mother. Okay, I'll go over it one more time and one time only. Step-by-step procedure and general outlines, right? So he goes from A, F, G, H, I, A to M, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're not done. All the way to V, right? He goes out to Staten Island. I drove, known to roam, right? I drove all the way out to Staten Island to meet this woman. After I rang the doorbell, I found this wasn't the Betty Falco I was looking for. She almost called the cops on me. So look at how meticulous this guy was, cross-referencing things. I went to the 42nd Street Library to check out phone books from 1950 onwards. So I think Susan Sugar was not only accurate, she was dead on accurate.
She was, and let me remind us that she does write to him in 1980. I think it's 1980 for sure, that she interviewed her aunt, Betty, and she did not put 95% of what she told her in the article and only 5%.
Right. So what's your point there, though?
Well, the point is that there was accuracy that she received straight from the mother.
Right. Now, but this of course brings up how did she know this? She didn't know Disco Dave. How did she know his every step? I guess Disco Dave must have told Betty, right? That could be the only thing.
Yeah, that could be. In other words, and then after the emotions, how did you ever find us?
Right, and maybe Betty and Roz knew the answers and told her this extremely detailed. Like this is basically a synopsis of what he's writing here.
Yeah.
And so again, I question, did she really know Disco Dave? In fact, did she interview Disco Dave for this article? I don't know. We don't know. We don't have a clue.
Susan.
Correct. I'm just bringing it up. I'm just throwing it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we got to carry on. We have a lot to unpack.
Oh yes, great show.
Oh, thank you. I might even need to take a break, Eric, in 5 minutes to use the restroom, and you can carry the show for 2 or 3 minutes while I do that, because I don't want to. I don't want to.
You know what? Let me. A bit of sense of humor. You know how he says, "I couldn't give up the hunt. Everything else, this was the only thing that mattered." I feel almost like that in preparing for all these shows.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't you feel like that?
Let me tell you something. This past week, to put this show together, I was in hell reading all of these. I mean, diving into the mind of this guy, it makes you feel dirty and gross. That's why I say I'll be very glad when today's show is over. I know that we're having a great time and I'm loving doing it, but this is dark stuff that takes a lot out of you for sure.
It's so lewd when he goes into the sexual things and everything.
He's gross.
It's vile. It's vile, but
all right, let's carry on because we have so much to do. So page 3. Okay. In the months following their reunion, Betty continued to see Richard, right, David, as content and successful. But Rosalind began to sense that there was something more to them than what showed on the surface. I had an inkling of something, not 100%, but I felt he was just very lonely, mixed up. I would never put my finger on crazy. Shortly after they became acquainted, Nat Berkowitz called Rosalind. He felt strongly that David needed psychiatric help. He had seen David standing in front of a mirror, pounding his head with his hands. He begged Rosalind to see if she could get her brother to go for help. Now, the reason why I bring this up, these two passages, is because, again, Maury Terry, in writing The Ultimate Evil, portrayed David Berkowitz as a sane and normal individual who just got caught up with some bad people and they influenced him. But in this article, you can see clearly that way before Son of Sam, or I should say before Son of Sam, not way before, because this was in 1975, he was showing signs of this mental illness that would eventually lead to his murder spree.
And it was discerned by Rosalind, also known as Roz.
Exactly. So, again, Rosalind asked if there was any way she could help. No. When she called on another occasion, here's the point here. On another occasion, right? Rosalind was speaking to him on the phone. He said, "Do you hear that? Do you hear that? Do you hear those dogs?" So here they are talking about dogs in 1975, right?
Mhm.
Rosalind acknowledged that she heard them. He told her that the super had two big dogs in the backyard that were barking all the time. That's very accurate. He writes about that in his psychiatric letters.
Yeah.
They're driving me crazy. Sometimes I think they're doing it just for spite, just to get me. When I come home and they know I have to sleep, they start barking. Well, during the same exact period of time, maybe just a little later when he moved to Yonkers, the same exact things are happening. 12/14/76. Sam Carr is king. Sam Carr's dog says, "Spill blood tonight, David." Sam's dog has been screaming for blood. He's so hungry. Kill for Sam Carr.
Of course, she's going to want him to get therapy. Then he starts changing his voice. He's giggling further down.
Right, exactly. He's sort of giggling. I asked him, what was the matter? He said, "Oh, nothing. They're out to get me, but they're not going to get me."
Yeah, I think my phone is bugged, this and that.
But I want to read this. I want to read this, though.
Do that.
I said, "Who is out to get you?" He said, "People. Just people. I think my phone is bugged. I even think they bugged my car. They're out to get me. They're going to get me." And again, I asked, "Who? What makes you say this?" "Just people. Just people." And then he said, "I have to go now." All right. So there's that word people again. Moet, we got that word people for you. Remember, in that same period, he was writing these wigged out letters in his apartment. "There is no peace on earth, and Sam Carr, my master, rules Yonkers and soon wants to possess the Bronx and Queens. God help those people, because Sam and John have the power to drive people crazy. The people of Yonkers are the meanest, cruelest people to ever live. They have only one goal, and that is to hunt, maim, destroy, and kill the people of the Glenwood section of Yonkers. These sadistic, vicious, brutal assaults upon innocent people of the community cannot be allowed to continue. For the love of God and all humankind, we, the people of Yonkers, must unite against these deadly foes and destroy these parasites before they spread."
The Lord of Life sees his kingdom being attacked.
Correct. And what's crazy to me is the fact that he's using the word people. He loves that term, and here it is in the Good Housekeeping article. So you want to tell me that this is inaccurate?
No.
This is completely accurate.
Very accurate.
Very.
Also because, it's amazing. She says she leaves out probably scandalous things that could be about the mother, but she doesn't leave out what's serious on the part of Rosalind.
What do you mean by that?
Well, she said to him, I didn't write 95% of what your mother told me, only 5. But she does put in what is very serious psychologically about Rosalind, his sister, and her concern for his madness, basically.
Right. I mean, this is an again, very accurate and very believable stories, considering what he was writing and what we have provable in his writing. Just the fact that they have the word people in there is huge to me. All right, Eric, let's move on. Page 4.
Maybe sense what that Rosalind was written about, making him go get psychiatric or psychological help.
Probably.
Mhm.
So, of course, this just deals with the fact that they didn't have any clue, right, with this other side of his life, so obvious, so the malicious graffiti covering the walls, which, once you actually see it, it doesn't look so bad, right? There it is. It's really not that big a deal. But while this other side of his life, so obviously psychotic, couldn't the family have seen for themselves the true depths of his illness? No, as Betty and her family knew him, he was immaculate. His clothes were few and simple, but always spotless. His fingernails so clean you couldn't help noticing them. He carried a toothbrush with him so he could brush after every meal. But meanwhile, his apartment is like this. Now, of course, this brings up the Paul Hart. He gets it, man. People, just people. I've been wanting to say that all week, guys. I finally got my chance. So, um, this of course brings up the whole issue of the staged apartment and whether this apartment was really like this for a long time or whether he did it in the days prior. I personally think he started doing this about a month before the arrest because we have documentary evidence of his next door neighbor on video. I didn't This is video from the night from the day of the arrest where she said that about a month before the arrest she heard a huge bang on the wall, and that probably, and there was the wall that shared the apartment here, this wall right here. So I think that he did this a month before. Now Maury says he only did it a few days before. He again lied and totally misrepresented what the neighbor said in the book. She actually said it was a month before. So I don't think that he did it in the days prior to his arrest. But I think he was starting this a month before. But I do think that the graffiti and all of this stuff strewn on his floor was in the days prior to his arrest. Because again, I can't get out of what my mind. Um, right, exactly. John Catalano found that video for us about with the neighbor. Um, I can't get out of my mind again the fireman from 1993 saying that he was in Berkowitz's apartment for the Glassman door fire, and the place was clean. It didn't have any writing on the wall.
Mm.
So I think that, and I can see a fireman overlooking this hole in the wall, or maybe Berkowitz had something over it, covering it up. But I think this is still one of the controversies of Son of Sam, but it still doesn't speak to anybody having help. He could have done this all by himself.
Oh, definitely. And also, wasn't his car always in order, but later on found a
Very
bit
messy, right?
messy?
And we're gonna deal with that as
Yeah.
well.
So there's something going on with his psycho-emotional self, unless it's pre-planned for whatever weird reason, where everything is neat, pristine, and perfect, and then he just uh, lets everything become a mess. Now, who wrote that on the left? Is that Maury Terry? That's not from the letter. Is that Terry?
No, this is from the article.
Oh, the article. Okay.
So Peter Caponolo writes very, very astutely. Maybe that mirror covered it up. Look, it's the perfect width,
Hmm.
right? It
Yeah.
could have hung on here. Anyway, good observation, Peter. I mean, this is the kind of things we need to do. I mean, we're not coming to any conclusions here, but we're asking different questions, which I think is important. Now, here, of course, this is very accurate. They knew he liked maps and kept a large quantity of them in his car. That's true. When he was arrested, his car had tons of maps. When Rosalind's bank was giving out folders with maps, her first thought was, I've got to give this to Richie. He's got a lot of maps. She could never have foreseen the day when David Berkowitz, the Son of Sam suspect, would be explaining to interrogators how he used these maps to note access routes to the scene of his crimes. He was getting off on the fact that he was using his sister's maps to commit crimes. I think he really liked that. And
Yeah.
there's
And
evidence that I'm gonna show that proves that later.
and that was a culture up until the 80s, early 90s. People did have maps. People who like to drive. There's many a driver who liked to find his own way around. Maps were very common. There wasn't MapQuest on the computer.
Exactly, and of course, we know that he in the psychiatric letters, there's at least 2 or 3 times when he draws out maps. And here we have one of his apartment building, Barnes Avenue, and I showed this on a previous show compared to
Mhm.
Google Earth, and it was deadly accurate, completely accurate. Um, Now, Eric, I need to go use the restroom. So what I want you to do for the audience is read this, please, and give your opinions and thoughts on this. Okay.
Okay.
I'll
All
be
right.
right back, guys.
Okay.
I'm doing what Dave Moth always said, which was take a pee break. I'll be right back.
All right. I have it right here. It's page 4 of the Good Housekeeping article. One evening, after a family dinner, Rosalind joined Richie in his car when he drove a relative to her apartment. On the way back, Rosalind and Richard did a lot of talking about themselves and their childhoods. When they reached Rosalind's block, they parked and continued to talk. He was out of work at the time and very depressed. He said he felt very down and lonely. Then, suddenly, the feelings he had held in so long overwhelmed him. He covered his face with his hands and started to cry. He cried for a long while. Sadness was evident again in another conversation. While briefly mentioning to his sister his army experience and the religious interest he had developed at the time under the influence of his Baptist friends, Richard also talked about the possibility of reincarnation and another life. He said he wished his time would come so he would go into a second life, Rosalind recalls. Now, does everybody see at the lower bottom that black mark where, let's see, then suddenly the feelings he had held in so long overwhelmed him? That's made by Berkowitz. I guarantee that's Berkowitz that highlighted that with the black border mark, Manny.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, I don't know what you said, but my thoughts on this was that Berkowitz
Well, I read the whole thing up to Rosalind recalls from one evening, and the fact of the matter is that I discovered, as I told you, that like with all the other letters, Susan's letters that he then sent to Abrahamson, he's the one who makes all the underlinings in a very dark pen mark, and I'm assuming he did that to highlight what he wants to get across to Abrahamson in sending him this letter.
right, but I actually think that right, I actually think though that this is probably accurate. I think that probably at certain points during the Son of Sam spree, Berkowitz probably felt actually overwhelmed by it and maybe even depressed and sad about what he was doing. I think that this shows a side of Berkowitz that we actually is real and shows that there's a couple different people in there for sure. I mean,
I
I'm
agree
trying
with you because
right,
no one personality of any one of us is one dimensional.
right,
But this piece right here, I have to say, destroys the word inaccurate. It destroys it. And now Rosalind suddenly, with today's show, comes to the forefront.
right, exactly.
Somebody
And
I wish I could interview.
And
We
what's what's interesting, right? I would like to find her if she's still alive. What's interesting about this, of course, is that he's driving in the car that he, did all the Son of Sam crimes in, and he's sitting there talking to a woman. It's his sister, yeah, but he's sitting there talking to a woman intimately in a car. It's very similar to his victims.
That's right. I thought that while reading it, and also what jumped out at me is we know somewhat about his religious interests, but now I'd like to know more about his army experience, and we don't really hear much or find that much in his writings.
None.
That's what
Very.
I'd like to find out.
I would too. Although he does address. Remember, you said that Detective Rothstein, Jim Rothstein, thought that he was assaulted sexually by a man in the army.
Yeah, well, Rothstein, what Jim said is based on experience, common experience from the crimes that were vice, the sexual crimes, that it's not uncommon of a sexual assault of a gang rape of soldiers or even one or two on a man, like a prison, actually.
Right, right. Well, but Berkowitz does address this in the letters. It's not part of today's show, but he said that he denied that it ever happened. But it's funny that Abrahamson had the same question. He said, "Were you ever assaulted in the army by a man?"
Well, we know
Anyway,
in me he starts to take LSD.
Exactly. So now we're starting to get into Disco Dave's meticulous nature. Okay.
Mm.
His car was a special source of pride to him. Often, when he visited Rosalind, he'd spend hours working on his car or polishing it. Afterwards, greasy and sweaty, he'd shower and put on a clean shirt. Rosalind rode in the car with him on innumerable occasions. It was always immaculate inside, shining outside, and she never saw it any other way. I think that this is true. Now, check this out. This is very important passage for not only the car thing, but I really wish, again, no shade on Carl Denaro is not what I'm trying to do here, but I really wish Carl Denaro would finally come to realize that he was shot by David Berkowitz. I think it would help Carl in his life. I think he would be able to move on and get peace. This is just my opinion. And the reason why I think he should do it is because Berkowitz said that he did it, describes doing it with one hand many times, exactly like the ballistics showed. So here he is again. Why did I shoot with one hand, and when I missed, why was I frustrated, you ask? Well, the best answer that I could give is a 50-50 one. I wanted to take a life, and yet I wanted to spare a life. I felt that I had to kill someone. I wanted to, and I didn't want to. Now, here's the nut meat of what we're talking about. I spent hundreds of dollars fixing my car up, putting it in perfect working order for this event or events. I spent a great deal of money in gas and oil. Now, this gets into the interesting things that Mike Lorenzo brings up about previous crimes. I purchased other guns before my 44 caliber revolver. A shotgun and a 45 caliber rifle already cost me almost $500. Plus, I bought ammo and cleaning materials. Lastly, I spent a great many hours driving in search of victims. No, I knew that I was going to commit the crimes that I set out to do. So here he is, very accurately, right? This so-called inaccurate article. Well, it's exactly.
It's perfect. I mean, notice how there's a connection though with the immaculate state of the car and an opening up of his heart, mind, and soul to Rosalind. It's almost it's rather poetic, the coincidence. It's Rosalind whom he opens up to, according to the article.
Right,
But,
exactly. And Rosalind's in the car with him with innumerable times, it says, which is
but
very interesting.
as a New Yorker, I'm quite curious about how easy it was for him to get guns. Now you can buy a shotgun and a rifle, but the revolvers and everything, I'm just curious.
Well, he bought the revolver in Houston, remember?
That's right. Yeah, down in Texas, like that.
Now, this article is an aside, and this is for the serious Son of Sam heads out there. You all know that I've been talking about briefly, and I only hinted at it a few times, but the possibility exists that Berkowitz was the infamous Dart Man of Westchester, and Mike Lorenzo was hot on that. And we were almost ready to film, but then we recognized that in Klausner's book, he alibis Berkowitz for two of the shootings, June 9th, 1976 and June 14th, 1976. And because it says that he had driven to Florida in that article on May 29th and came back on the 12th or the 13th of June. In this article, and I didn't put the passage in because I should have now that I'm talking about it. But in this article, it says that he drove to Houston and back in 3 days, which means that he could have done the Dartman shooting on the 9th and on the 12th. And on the 14th.
But that's why I drive to Texas.
Not if you're a manic roamer.
Yeah, I mean,
right,
Texas
but
itself is a continent. It's no, I'm not doubting it.
Right. No, but what I'm saying though is now the door is open to speculate on the Dartman again, which I think is exciting. All right, so now here we go again. Inaccurate. Late in the evening, the family couldn't help noticing that a restlessness came over him. Very often, he would go out for walks that lasted up to 2 hours. He said he liked to walk. He often took walks with Leo, his uncle, and with Wendy and Lynn. How were they to imagine that when he walked alone, he was stalking neighborhoods, as he later admitted to interrogators? They knew that he liked to drive. Oh, wait, here it is. They knew that he liked to drive and that he drove a great deal. They did not know that he drove all the way to Texas in 3 days in June 1976 and returned with a 44 caliber pistol. So now this throws shade on Klausner's account.
That's right.
We don't know which one is true. I'm not saying that this one is true and Klausner is wrong or vice versa. But what I'm saying is this passage has now given us what we need to go forth with our Dartman video.
And
And
Klausner interviewed Betty Falco, and we do learn that she wanted to be interviewed by him in one of her Susan's letters, and he highlights and returned with a 44 caliber pistol. He underlines that it's rather light, but it's there.
right. So I don't know what to believe, but I found this passage very interesting. But the real thing that I'm trying to find, that I'm finding interesting again, is here. The family noticed that a restlessness came over him in the evening. Now look at what he writes himself. It is interesting to note my changes in behavior and actions during the daylight hours and at sunset. They were two opposites. At night I hunted, in the day I helped. I became vicious and lethal at night to people I never even knew before and whom I just met by chance. On the other hand, during the day I was kind, friendly, and courteous to other motorists and pedestrians, also neighbors and strangers. However, these two extremes I cannot explain. This is where you, Dr. Abrahamson, come in. Maybe you can say why. So here he is saying exactly the same thing that's in the so-called inaccurate article.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think he cares for somebody else to be so accurate about him. He has to be the one who's accurate. He doesn't care for somebody else to describe him accurately.
Right. So Cracklin Rosie's bringing up Burke also visited Nat. He did Florida and Texas in 3 days. Again, Cracklin, we're not saying we know for sure, right? That's not what the point is. We don't know. And you're probably asking the same question yourself. But we have Klausner's account where he leaves for Florida on May 29th and comes back to Yonkers on the 14th or thereabouts of June. And now we have this, that he drove to Texas in 3 days and returned with a 44 caliber. So there's two different accounts. Which one is true? Again, I don't know. But now we have two different accounts of the trip to Texas. All right, so this is interesting that this inaccurate article knew something very accurate about him that he later confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, this is him now confirming another thing: the long walks with Leo. Here he is writing to Abrahamson. We don't have to read the whole thing. My uncle Irving, I love very, very. He was such a wonderful and mysterious man. Rarely did he venture out of the house. Now, why is it Irving and not Leo? Well, he was influenced by Irving. Okay. He went out walking when we shared our long walks together, right? And so on and so forth. So here he is confirming in a letter that it wasn't Leo that he went out with, but he learned how to take long walks with his uncle Irving, which again confirms this right here. He would often go out for walks and he liked to walk. Okay.
And Irving was the sister of his spiritual adoptive mother, Pearl.
Pearl, correct. These
She
were
was
his
Schwimmer maiden name.
Correct. So here he is confirming again in this so-called inaccurate article. It's a very accurate detail. So I think this Good Housekeeping article is actually an excellent primer into the mind of David Berkowitz and what was going on in those years.
When did Klausner's book come out, Manny?
I think Klausner's book came out in 80 or 81, but I'm not sure.
And they already knew about Texas before it was revealed by Klausner.
Don't quote me on that date. I don't know for sure, but probably 79, 80, 81. But yeah, it seems like they knew about but in 1978, yeah, you're right. They knew about it before Klausner.
Yeah, it's quite curious. Where did this, you see, this once again puts forth what we're perplexed about the relationship of Susan and David. Just as the article is accurate, not inaccurate as he states, did they really not know each other?
Exactly. She knew way too many things about him for my comfort.
I just started to think right now. Yeah.
Right. So anyway, here he is talking more about his long walks, right? Proving again, he loved to roam. He was a walker. You asked me about where I disappeared to when Lenny couldn't find me. Well, I went on long walks. Sometimes I walked for miles. I tried to tell these guys, my friends, where I went, but they just couldn't believe that I or anyone else could walk so far. He also loved to ride bikes, guys. He loved to roam. From my home in the southern end of the Bronx, I used to ride all the way up to Armonk or Valhalla. Everyone, you should know that that's at least 35 miles, okay, one way. So this was not a very easy drive, a bike ride, okay? The furthest I ever traveled was to Armonk, Coos Cobb, Connecticut. It should say Cos Cobb, which is in southern Connecticut on US Route 1. He knows these areas. He's very accurate, right? I was once planning on riding my bike all the way out to Montauk Point, Long Island. So he loved to roam. He loved to walk. I was a lot different from the other kids my age. I did different things that other kids never dared to do. I climbed for the thrill of it. Huge, formidable cliffs. At the age of 14 or 15, I was an avid rock climber. I had a host of mountain climbing gear. I used to go down the Trailways bus and head up to New Paltz, New York, where the Shawangunk Mountains. This is all true. He's accurate in his recounting of this. I've been to the cliffs in Shawangunk. They scare the shit out of me. Okay. When I scaled those cliffs, I mean, I really did it by myself on the end of a rope. I love to rappel off the top, rappelling and sliding down, right? So here he is roaming, cliff hanging, biking everywhere.
I'd like to know the type of bike he had.
Yeah, great. Good question. Did he say it was him and his Schwinn? Hold on. Biking here. Hold on. He might have. I used to ride, just me and my bicycle. He doesn't say what kind of bike he had.
Mm-hmm.
Page 5. And we see Scott Cardinal's in the house. So we want to give a big shout out to Scott Cardinal, who is, in a way, partly responsible for the rebirth and the regeneration of this video series. Because ever since I've done his shows, we have exploded in popularity. All right, this one is going to be tough, guys. Okay, because this is where we are dealing now with something from the article that Berkowitz answers. Okay, and so we actually really need to deal with this. So we're going to read this. As I said, this is going to be a long show. There was only one time Rosalind actually felt uneasy in relation to her brother. While describing this incident and seeing it for the first time in its true light, the full horror suddenly hit her. It was Thanksgiving night, November 25th, 1976. Richard, as usual, was part of the family gathering. After watching the 11 o'clock news, he said goodnight and left. About 10 minutes later, he came back and said, "I can't make it home in this traffic. It's bumper to bumper. I can't get home in this." I remember Leo saying to me, "I can't imagine what kind of traffic there is at this hour." Well, I told Richie to stay here and go home in the morning. Wendy was with my mother, so he slept in the room with Lynn. At this point in her narrative, Rosalind stopped momentarily. Her entire body seemed to shiver. When I think of it, my God. I was very restless that night, she continues. I don't know why, but I felt strange that I didn't sleep all night. Then I heard Richie get up and go into the living room. Remember, Richie is Disco Dave. And lie down on the couch. Then he was in the kitchen. I remember he was eating. So here he is sneaking into the kitchen, just like his father said, right? And just like he said, he couldn't go into the kitchen to eat when anyone else was in there. Then he was in the kitchen. I remember he was eating. He had all the food out of the refrigerator, the stuffing, the cranberry sauce. Then he left very early in the morning. As son of Sam suspect David Berkowitz was to explain later, it gets dark and I can't sleep. When I'm home, I have to go out. I know what has to be done. I am told all day. It becomes a matter of routine. Go out, clean the 44, go out hunting. The spirits are watching, riding. I wouldn't do it, I didn't want to kill somebody. I tried to fight it. Were the demons making him restless that night? Was his story about bumper-to-bumper traffic a desperate attempt to resist their bloodthirsty demands by seeking refuge in his sister's apartment? If so, the respite was only temporary, for the very next night, on November 26, 1976, the son of Sam shot and severely wounded Joanne Lomino and Donna DeMasi in the Glen Oaks section of Queens on a street 7 blocks from Rosalind's apartment. So now, I don't think Rosalind, Eric, realized the full horror of what actually was going on in Disco Dave's mind.
No, because I think if she did, if there was anyone who would have reported him officially, I'm just taking a chance, I think she would have.
Now let's see what was in his mind. There were times that I was troubled over my sudden urges after the shootings began. I used to visit my sister, the same person who just was speaking in the article before, And when I did, my gun, maps, extra ammunition, and other related paraphernalia were always carefully stored in my car for quick use. After a visit, but almost daily, I left around 10 or 11 o'clock. Very accurate. The article said he left at 10 o'clock, right? To begin making my rounds, so to speak. I did travel in the vicinity of Glen Oaks Village and Floral Park, as well as many other places. Yes, Queens was special to me, very special. But this I can't explain. Shooting someone in Queens was an obsession. Now, check this out, guys. When I got bad urges about my family, knowing that my gun was so close, yet frightened by these thoughts, I'd just go and take a long walk to release any mental tensions I had for the moment. Walking for me has always been very therapeutic. So here he is wanting to kill his family.
Yeah. I mean, it's
He says it even more here.
mhm.
Around her and her family, I always repressed my true feelings. Behind my mask, Richie Nice Guy, I was filled with anger and rage towards her. This is his mother. With absolute control, I managed never to show or verbalize this. In the Good Housekeeping article, she told of the way I stopped coming around before my capture, how I totally lost in my delusions. Well, she's wrong. To be frank and honest, I felt myself losing control. I mean, I was getting a very powerful urge to kill most of my natural family. I fought hard to keep these thoughts from becoming actions, so I just stayed away altogether. What are your thoughts so far, Eric?
My thoughts, I think it's analogous to how he says he loves women and everything, but if he was out, he would kill them. It's almost as if the moment he comes closer to someone and there is love and everything, something within him wants to murder them.
Exactly, and we're not done.
No.
Although I
Mhm.
although I was unconscious of it at the time, through a recent period of self-analysis, I finally see why I persistently shot the victims in the head. You know what? This is it's the one down here, sorry. I've always been a cautious person. There are people whom I associated with just prior to my capture, peers, family, neighbors. After my arrest, they said, "I can't believe he's the killer." Well, if they could have read my mind and seen my thoughts, then they would have known without a doubt that I was the son of Sam. Oh, and we're not done. Coincidentally, I never managed to shoot anyone in my sister's neighborhood. The streets were narrow, winding, and dark. There were also plenty of unlit parking lots and spots between those garden apartments. Actually, I hunted for victims in Glen Oaks more than anywhere else. I shot 2 girls in Floral Park, a mere 7 blocks from my sister's home. However, I just wasn't lucky at scoring in the Glen Oaks neighborhood. I don't know what motivated me to hunt there so often. For some reason, I felt the need to slay someone in Glen Oaks, in or around my sister's house. Perhaps I wanted to scare her or the kids. I'll never understand these things sometimes. Sometimes we do things without a conscious idea of why we're doing it. Often we don't even have a conscious motive, but we do it. The mind is a puzzle. So here he is talking about wanting to kill his family.
And Glen, what's the neighborhood or the area of Yonkers called Glen?
Glenwood. He lived in the Glenwood section of Yonkers, but it's one word, Glenwood.
Yeah, but
This
I'm
is
wondering if there's an association
good
with
point.
the word Glen.
That's a really good question, actually. I think that that's a fantastic question. I think
He
it's
lived in
definitely worthy of
the
thought.
ward of Glenwood
Glen
and
Oaks.
to Glen Oaks. And then you could even say oak from an oak tree, wood.
And of course there was the oak tree, not to come right after a laugh, but there was the oak tree that was very, very prominent at the spot of Valentina Suriani's murder.
Mhm.
But anyway, we're getting back into conspiracy land here. But I have to say, Eric, that was a great observation. Glen Oaks and Glen Woods. I wonder whether there was a connection there. And of course, his mother here, talking about his mother, reasons for seeking her, and the fourth one is to kill her and to hurt her. Okay, so this was a guy who was getting all sorts of nasty thoughts while staying with his family. Luckily, he controlled himself, but he was thinking about killing them all.
Oh God.
I mean, this is sick stuff. Page 6. So now we're getting towards the end of the spree. We're getting towards the beginning of the end. Okay, and we have dealt with this time period. I did a whole show last year called April 77. Because March and April in 77 was when everything started to really start unraveling for Disco Dave in his apartment on Pine Street. So now, isn't it curious that early in March 1977, Rosalind and her family began planning for their traditional Passover Seder dinner. They had wanted Richard to join them. Remember, Richie is Disco Dave, as he had the previous year. So he was there in 1976. By 77, he was no longer there. Wendy and Lynn were particularly eager. They all took turns calling him day after day at all hours. They were unable to reach him, and in great disappointment, they celebrated Passover without him. For David Berkowitz had finally lost all contact with the people he cared most about and was by this time, as son of Sam, hopelessly enmeshed in the web of horror that his psychosis had created. On April 17th, the 44 caliber killer murdered Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau. Okay, now, I'd like to know how she knew that in March of 77 he was unraveling when in fact that was the case. Right? Because in March 1977 and in February 77, he's writing these letters, right? Today is Friday, blood day. Today I will spill blood for the people of the house of horror. My ears are ringing because the dogs are hungry. Today the devil dog at Wicker Street is in great pain. I said to Joaquin, why do you, right? So the people of Wicker Street. So in this happened on March 77 right here. This is March 77, the same time period where he was starting to ignore his family and lose contact, right?
They live so close to each other. How come they didn't go personally and knock on his door?
Well, they didn't live that close. Queens and Yonkers are not that close.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, one of the
maybe, Susan Sugar lived 3 blocks away, but that's another issue. But anyway, the point is, here they are, right? Susan Wishengrad is very accurately pointing to the month that it all started to really unravel for the guy. And here we have in his apartment writings at that same exact time period, February and March. In fact, the day he shot Virginia Voskerichian was this day. He is clearly showing signs of breaking down, completely lost in his psychosis. So this article is deadly accurate. In fact, more accurate than it should be if she didn't know him.
Definitely.
All day long, the devil dog has been yelling in pain. There is no ceasing. I beg the Wicker Street cult. So anybody who thinks that there was a cult involved, yeah, there was. It was called the Imaginary Wicker Street Cult. Okay. How much blood does he want me to spill for him? 3877, 915. 12 hours later, Virginia Voskerichian was dead on a Queens street. Okay. So interesting that passage was in that article, because we're finding total proof of it. Very accurate. Page 7. And Eric, if you have anything to say, please speak up.
I just wondered who in that family might have actually received correspondence from him from jail.
Good question. I don't know. And hey, I'm just checking our viewership. Eric, we're up like 30 viewers this week. We normally have like low 60s. We're up to 92 viewers right now. So word is spreading.
Great. Well,
and of course, all to everybody out there in audience land, please make yourself known in the chat. Say hello. We want to know all you new people.
And our viewers are even listening in from Europe.
Yo, we have Ethiopia in the house. We got them all here today. This is where it's at. This is the only son of Sam. Well, Cracklin Rosie. We're going to give Cracklin Rosie credit too, because she's doing good work. In fact, she's doing work in the same space we are. She's doing work on these psychiatric letters and talking about Dave's mindset. But besides Cracklin Rosie and us, everything else is a joke. They're still talking about the cult as if it was real. So this is where it's at. This is where the cool kids are. Anyway, let's carry on. Page 7. So I found this interesting, especially in light of your just asked questions. So this is after the arrest, right? I've been reduced. He's in jail. And yet in letters to the family after his arrest, he denied nothing. His first letter addressed to dear Leo, Roz, Wendy, Lynn, and Mom. So that's his brother-in-law, his biological half-sister, and her children, and his mother.
There's the answer to my question.
Right. This is right after. So I'm sorry for the things that have happened to you as a result of me. Just remember the good times we've had when we were together. Roz, Mom, I miss your wonderful cooking. Leo, I miss talking with you. I wish there was some way I could make you happy. Please take care now. Well, interestingly enough, here was a letter found in his apartment. So he was he was actually thinking about writing Roz and Leo during the height of the spree. Dear Roz and Leo, we never have much to say when we're together, probably never will, now or ever. Love cannot be found in words. If it could, I would give each one of you a set of encyclopedias on your birthdays. And as I go on my mysterious way, I still think of you someday. I see nothing in you but good. There are no words for that either.
Mhm.
So it's a kind of a similar vibe, but it's
Yeah,
like here he was practicing writing what he eventually wrote them in jail. So that's, I don't know, that's kind of interesting to me.
and give them a set of encyclopedias. That was a common thing to have in the house back then, encyclopedias. And
Exactly.
it meant that the family probably liked knowledge, learning, because Rosalind seems to be very intelligent. Wishing Glad,
Right.
you know.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So let's carry it on. Told you guys this is going to be a dense show. We have a lot to talk about. So page 8. This deals with now what I call the anyone could do it horse shit. And this is where I get very angry at both Susan Sugar and Disco Dave. And also I wonder how much they knew each other because their arguments are exactly the effing same. She's making the same freaking argument that he does in his thing. The anyone could do it horse shit. Okay.
Yeah,
So
that crap. And sometimes in Susan's letters, if you people should look them up, which we did last week, you would almost think it was Berkowitz writing his Son of Sam letters, and that's why I said shades of Maury Terry.
exactly. This Susan Sugar needs to be spoken to. But it was not so simple for Betty Falco and her family, who knew that there was a human side to the Son of Sam. It was the only side they had ever known. All right, so not a word of the victims. Okay, I get it. They're trying to show him as human. On May 8th, 1978, David Berkowitz pleaded against the evidence of his lawyers, pleaded guilty to all the 44 caliber shootings. His plea was accepted by all 3 judges. Once again, the media described him as coldly unemotional, speaking in a monotone, showing no remorse. Once more, the public was presented with the image of a one-dimensional fiend. What else were they supposed to show? Him doing good deeds? This was a murderer. This was a psychotic murderer. Who were
Yeah,
they supposed to?
but he was a good boy. You don't know. You
Right.
don't know what
Anyone.
he was like with the kids and how he made us laugh and.
Right. Anyone could do this. Right.
Mhm.
David Berkowitz was, as he explained to his psychiatrist, a nice guy, a loving person, basically a peaceful person who didn't want to kill, but was forced to by the howling demons who tormented him. He insisted that Sam, the devil, would soon be victimizing other people, creating new sons of Sam. There's that whole thing that Maury used to show that there was a cult, but Berkowitz was just saying Sam was going to create new people, and he wanted to warn the world of this danger. This sounds just like this Berkowitz writing right here. This is Berkowitz writing right here.
Yeah, well, there's 2 things here. Berkowitz is writing. Second, I believe that the head psychiatrist at this time is before Abrahamson. It has to be Daniel Warren Schwartz, because
Right.
it's to him that he speaks of demonic and all of that. And it also, we return to the demonic and others when he's interviewed in the Rob Klug film by Maurice Dubois. There's a constant with Berkowitz. There's a constant, for me, a game.
Totally.
Now I'm going to say it's almost like, oh, I think today I'll wear this red shirt.
Yeah.
Or
Now,
the blue one.
right now, I'm going to say this to this journalist and this to this journalist.
Right.
But somehow or other, Maury Terry was immune from that, and he just told the truth to Maury Terry. So, I mean, give me a break, guys.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is Susan Wishengrad writing in the article, but this could have been written by David Berkowitz. It's the exact same voice. It's uncanny. So now here's where we compare Wishengrad with Berkowitz. When we first got the idea about writing a story for the magazine, there were many reasons for it. All right, so this is all but most of all, and I really mean this, our main intention was not to make a bundle, but to give the other side of the story. Yeah, right. They made a bundle.
Yeah, this sickens me. It repulsed me.
We were all upset about the kind of articles that were being printed in the media about you, all depicting you to be a monster and all distorting the truth about your background and Betty's personal history. We knew a side of you that no one else did, and we wanted people to try to see you in a different light, as a human being, not a fiend, as someone with problems and feelings and sadness and dreams, just like the rest of us. We thought that if people could see that you were a human being just like the rest of us, that they would understand that this kind of thing can happen to any of us, that we are all in the same boat with the same potential for success or failure, for happiness or grief, for sanity or insanity. Give me a break.
It's sick. Now,
It's sick.
I have no doubt that a relative could write that, but it also goes on. It also sounds like Berkowitz writing.
It sounds exactly like Berkowitz. Well, I have Berkowitz's writing, right?
Yeah, to Abrahamson over and over again. You
Right.
know,
So forget this. This was a mistake that I made up top here. But
that's why he doesn't want to be called a psychotic. He wants to be said, "I'm sane." Therefore, even any sane person can do what I did.
right, exactly. And he's saying, I am as wicked as ever. Wait, where was my? Here we go. Here we go. This is what I wanted. Likewise, I cannot remember all my evil doings. There is good and evil in all of us. We all have the potential to murder. We all have evil and sadistic fantasies. We too have homicidal fantasies at times, but due to a series of circumstances, our negative thoughts become actions and we turn to antisocial, right? And it says here in this, I can see her point. Any author would want to sensationalize a story like this. The idea of a deranged man stalking New York City would in all probability sell better. However, I believe that the truth is always better than some fictional nonsense, right? That anyone could do this. Hold on. Here. By this, I mean that a factual story about a sane man who kills just wouldn't titillate people's imaginations. So, Eric, this guy is writing, him and Susan Sugar are peas in a pod. They're saying the exact same thing. It's almost as if this is coordinated, or he read the letters and then he took on this persona, right? Like he was influenced by Susan. That's a possibility as well.
That is always a possibility, but yeah, I keep it open to all possibilities.
Right. We have to.
He is so determined. He is so accurate with his belief and what he does, whatever he does, like when he goes from A to V, that I would say that he could have taken on what she said because it served him.
Right, exactly. I could see that too. And that's why I was so keen on finding out when he read that article, because that article could have influenced him greatly in the way he portrayed himself to Abrahamson.
And maybe
Which-
his pride told Abrahamson it's inaccurate, but it's really accurate.
Right.
He to admit that somebody else could be so accurate about him.
Exactly. But I just find it extremely curious that Susan Sugar and David Berkowitz are speaking with the same voice, almost as if they're the same writer. The voice is almost exactly the same. I mean, you pick these things up if you read this stuff enough. And and I'm noticing seriously way too coincidental same things that they say. I'm starting to lose it because it's getting on 2 hours. Luckily,
No,
we're almost done.
I think you're correct. I don't think it is coincidence. I think it's there as a fact because of what perplexed me when I said, "Hey, Manny, look at this. Read between the lines."
Right. And we're going to have to deal with Susan's letters.
Read
We're going to
between the lines.
She
What if
writes
they
that
read
to him.
between the lines because everything is so clear. So there is a code there.
There's a code there.
Read the lines.
Read between the lines. Right. We're going to, I think our next series of shows, or at least the next show, and we'll discuss this, of course, off the air. But now that we've introduced this character of Susan even more, well, we have to deep dive into her letters to Richie because they're very rich. And but we still have 2 more pages to deal with. And in fact, on pages 9 and 10, my friends, there's really very little on here that was worth remarking on, except for one passage and one passage only. Remember the dates here. Remember the timelines. He had just been arrested, right? He was in prison. And here we go. In his last letter to the family before his day in court, Richard was more immersed deeply than ever in his religious thoughts. It appeared to Rosalind that what held him together, for the moment at least, was his belief in Jesus and his passion to make believers of everyone he knew. I love you. Jesus loves all of us. This is 1978. He's already talking about Jesus. That's a complete contradiction from the official story of when he became a born-again Christian. He writes and it's written here, in 1987, Berkowitz became a born-again Christian and started calling himself the Son of Hope. Right. And if you listen to his interviews, he talks about converting to Christianity years after he got into prison. So what the hell is he doing here? Talking about Jesus and quoting Psalm 27 and doing all this stuff with Jesus.
That goes hand in hand with what John Comparetto told us, where they called him a Bible thumper when he got back from the military.
Right. So he became a Bible thumper way before he admitted he currently admits to. And I find that's curious as well, because it also speaks to him using this religion as a manipulative tool as opposed to something real.
Forgive me if I'm getting up just to adjust my seat.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah. Once again, though, we have David Berkowitz embracing being a convert, and then in other areas in between, refusing it.
Right. But what I found very, very extremely weird about this was that we've never heard of him being a convert to Jesus until later. Yeah, during the army and then later in prison. But here he is in 1978, as soon as he's arrested, or a little bit afterwards, talking about Jesus and Psalm 27. This is another part of the Berkowitz story that we didn't get the correct version of, and now we need to parse this one out too. So this show, Eric, and we are officially done with the slides. This show raised a lot of very interesting questions to me. The first one being, how much did Susan really know about David, right? How much did they actually know each other? Did they know each other or not? Why did Berkowitz say the article was inaccurate when it was deadly accurate? We also learned a hell of a lot about Berkowitz's psychology, about being Jewish, about his feelings towards Gentile friends, his feelings towards his natural family, how he wanted to kill them. We learned about his intense preparation for the crimes, right? The cleaning of the car, the tuning it up, keeping it in immaculate shape. We learned a lot in this show, and I think that this article, the Good Housekeeping article, is something that you guys should absolutely read, because again, we are reframing the discussion in Son of Sam to take in now into our minds what we previously rejected because of the cult thesis. We rejected all of this as BS because of the cult thesis. But now that we have thrown away the cult thesis, we need to start looking at this background material more, and also not accepting it uncritically, being critical about it like we're doing, but also using it as a springboard to further research. This is where it's all at, guys. Anybody still talking about Billy the Artist or a woman shot Carl Denaro is a total fool. Okay. And we need to move on from that. And we have moved on from it, but it's time that we start thinking about this new stuff. And I, for one, am super excited. Eric, any final words for the people of the world?
Yeah, I would like to. Well, it goes to show that when you're investigating something, every little object, every little detail means something. And you've proven, when you began in the winter of 2021, March, it wasn't spring yet, every single thing must be investigated. Every item, every street. You know, I wasn't being conspiratorial when I said Glen Oaks and Glen Wood.
Listen, given the fact that he moved to Yonkers mysteriously, but his relatives just happened to live 3 blocks away, there could be something there.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience that I remember I live here on Meadowmere Park, and I lived in the ward of Wimbledon Park in London, and I woke up once saying, I'm going to take my father's car and drive to Revelstoke Road, which is in London. You know, these name associations, and I'm not being conspiratorial, but it's the way he works. But the thing about Carl Denaro, I would say, has he ever said why he believes it was a woman or someone else?
Yes, because Maury Terry told him, first of all, and second of all, because a ballistic expert, and we all know about these experts, right? In Son of Sam, Charles Hamilton, the handwriting expert, said that Berkowitz couldn't have written the Son of Sam letters. That expert was wrong. But Carl talks about how a ballistics expert told him that a woman or a 90-pound weakling shot him. Meanwhile, Berkowitz writes very clearly, I shot him with one hand. That was wild. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to take a life, but I didn't. So I shot wildly with one hand. And that explains it. Case closed. I mean, I don't understand. But anyway.
He could have even been using two hands, but tripped on a brick or a stone. And
true, but he writes that particularly for Denaro.
He writes, but I'm just saying, no, I agree he used one hand. He even writes that to Abrahamson. About
right using one hand to shoot Carl specifically. He talks about the Denaro Keenan shooting. So very, very interesting stuff. Eric, any final words for the audience, my friend?
I just wish that
did you already give?
I gave it, but I just wish 9/11 had not happened, because I'd be able to find a lot more relatives and more information would be open. I could go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and find
right.
I just, and to convince his relatives and say, look, we're not out to scandalize. We're not out to make money. We're thinking of the people who were murdered.
Exactly. All right, Eric, hang around. I'll say goodbye off the air, okay?
Another great one.
Thank you, Eric. We really appreciate it. We'll see you in a minute.
The guy who said that we were goats?
Well, goat means greatest of all time, so it was a was a compliment. All right, Eric. Well, we'll see you on next. Whenever. I mean, we'll probably see you tomorrow night on the Brooklyn show. But we'll see you next time.
Okay,
we'll see you next time. All right, guys. Well, this was a killer show. I was very excited about having put this one together for all you out there. I really am very humbled and grateful that I'm your guide through all this stuff. It's a lot of material to unpack, and I really think that the way we're doing this in this methodical, logical way, with bringing up shows and then dealing with the letters that only deal with that, and then showing things from the letters that compare to articles, I think this is a really great way to approach this, and I think it's extremely helpful to unpack this series of crimes. I just want to let everyone know that tomorrow night, again, if you're watching this live on 9/25/2022, we are dealing with Brooklyn. I didn't want to touch Brooklyn. As I was saying to the great John Catalano, I was afraid to touch Brooklyn. Why? Because it was the third rail of Son of Sam. As a non-cult theorist, I was actually scared to look into Brooklyn. Why? Because I didn't want there to be facts which contradicted my theory. Yes, sometimes I'm petty that way. I was afraid that the looking into Brooklyn was going to prove that that Disco Dave had help and there was a cult. Guess what I found? The complete opposite. And anyway, we'll deal with that tomorrow night. So listen, thank you so much, everyone out there, for your awesome positivity and vibes. We are extremely grateful to everyone out there, to the old school, to the new school. We just want to say thank you so much. So anyway, on behalf of the great Eric Galati, and on behalf, of course, of myself, I want to say thank you so much. And we will see you on the next Psychiatric Sunday. Take care, guys.